Okie dokie. So now let's talk about another really cool concept, which is handoffs. Handoffs is simply giving an agent the capability to invoke another agent. So for example, going back to our very first example, where we have our joke agent, and then we pass the output of the joke agent to our translation agent, our language agent. This was us manually taking the output and transferring it to the input of the next agent. But with handoffs, we can make it so that the joke agent can automatically pass its joke to the language agent to do the next step. We're going to do a cool example here. So we're going to make an agent that is capable of generating a tutorial for us. So what I do when I make my tutorials is first I'll make a basic outline in my head or I'll write it down somewhere. And then I'll take that outline and actually make code out of it. So I'll make a full code example of I'll code the entire thing out, and then within the code I'll have a bunch of comments, right? So we're going to do something similar. We're going to make a agent system capable of first generating an outline. So I have an outline agent, and the outline will then be passed to a tutorial generation agent that will actually build a tutorial based on that outline and mark it down so it looks really nice. So it'll be a combination of text explanations and code snippets to explain the concepts in code. So here's our outline builder agent. So it's going to be called outline builder, and then has detailed instructions. Given a particular programming topic, your job is to help come up with a tutorial. You will do that by crafting an outline. After making the outline, hand it to the code generator agent. I'll rename this to tutorial agent. All right, here's our tutorial generator agent. It says, given a programming topic and an outline, your job is to generate code snippets for each section of the outline. Format the tutorial in Markdown using a mix of text for explanation and code snippets for examples. Where it makes sense, include comments in the code snippets to further explain the code. So I think this makes a lot of sense. This is essentially how I would do it. So with the concepts of agents in mind, we have two different agents. They both have a particular task. They both specialize in that particular task so they can do it well, and they're going to work together essentially, okay? There's no tools, but if you want to, you can provide them if you want to give it some extra capability. But now that we have both of our agents, how can we connect them together using a handoff? So first we're going to reorder this. Because the outline agent is going to be invoking or handing off to the tutorial agent, we need to make sure that we have this one first, because we're going to do handoffs. So handoffs, and we're going to pass in a list of the agents that we're able to hand off to. So we're going to do tutorial generator. This is very similar to how we did tools, and behind the scenes it actually is handing off as a tool. That's just how it works behind the scenes. But basically, when you invoke this outline builder agent, it's going to decide on its own autonomously if it wants to hand off to the tutorial generator agent. So that's why we need to be very clear after making the outline, hand it off to the tutorial generator agent. So if it follows the instructions correctly, it should hand it off, and then it should, do the next part, which is actually create the tutorial, okay? So once we have defined our handoff, giving it the capability of actually handing off, we're now going to invoke a response. Tutorial response is equal to await runner dot to run, and we're going to pass in the outline builder because we're starting with this one and it hands off to this one, and then we're going to give it a prompt. So we're going to say loops in Java. So we want to make a tutorial on loops in Java, okay? And then we'll just print the tutorial response final output. All right, now something you need to be aware of: previously when we invoked a agent, the response that we got back from it was the response of that agent that we invoked. But of course, since we're going to be potentially handing off to a second agent, the response could be that second agent response. So that is what you need to expect. If an agent hands off to another agent, it doesn't return back to the previous agent unless you explicitly give it that capability. So whenever it hands off, it's going to end with the agent that it handed off to unless you tell it to do more stuff. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's just go ahead and run this now and see what we get. Boom, here we go. So now we have a markdown tutorial. It's marked down just because of the headers here. Loops in Java introduction. Loops are fundamental constructs in programming that allows you to execute a block of code multiple times. Types of loops. And then you have the for loop. Gives an overview. Gives you a code example. Great. Gives you another example. Let me scroll up here. Nested loops. Gives you a lot of examples. Yeah, this looks like a great tutorial, I would say. So if you want to, you could take the output and write it to an actual markdown file to look at it a little bit easier. But so far it looks great. Now, one thing that would be cool is if we could also get the outline, because right now it's just giving us the final output using the tutorial generator, which is just the actual tutorial itself. But it would be nice if there was a way to get both the outline that was originally generated and passed to this agent, as well as the output of the agent here. One way we could do that is by using what we learned before, the output type. And we're going to make a type for this called, let's just say tutorial, which is a base model. And so for this, we want both the outline and the tutorial itself. And then we can specify down here, so tutorial. All right, so the way that this works is now, because we're specifying the output type as tutorial, it has to return it in this schema here. And since these are not optional, it has to provide an outline and tutorial. So that will allow us to have both our outline and tutorial in the response. So let's go ahead and try this out. There we go. So we can see outline. It's hard to look. It's just putting it all in one line. So it's hard to actually read it. But we do have our outline and our tutorial. So it's working. So what's great about this is that even though only the first agent is generating the outline, it has to pass that outline to the second agent when it's handing off. So it has access to both. It just wasn't returning both before because we told it to only return the tutorial. So now that we added the output type, it knows that it needs to return both the outline that was used and the tutorial itself that it actually generated on its own. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know about you guys, but this is pretty awesome. One thing that you can do to supplement this is have a handoff description. As the documentation says, a description of the agent. This is used when the agent is used as a handoff so that the large language model knows what it does and when to invoke it. So what that means is that whenever you have a handoff description on an agent, any agents like this one that can hand off to this one can read the handoff description and know what it's used for. So if I write a detailed description like used for generating a tutorial based on an outline. This is very helpful when, for example, let's just say I have multiple agents that I can hand off to. And if I have an actual detailed description here, this will make it more clear when it's deciding which one to hand off to, which one is the one that it needs. So this one is specifically used for generating a tutorial based on an outline. So because again, this is autonomously on its own deciding what to hand off to. So this will help out a lot. Give it as much information as possible. Let me give you guys another example of handing off. So now we have something called a triage agent. This is usually just when you have an agent that takes an input and decides which one to route to. So in this case, we have a triage agent that takes a user's homework question and then decides whether to route to the history tutor agent or the math tutor agent, or if neither agent is relevant, provide a general purpose response. So it's kind of like a fork in the road. Which one do I choose? Or if none of them apply, then do nothing, just give a generic response, right? So the history tutor is for history, of course. You provide assistance with historical queries, explain important events in context clearly, and then it has a handoff description so that it better gives the triage agent the capability of knowing which one to, hand off to. Same thing with the math tutor. It's going to help with math queries and also has a handoff description. So let's run an example here. We're going to run our triage agent. We're going to ask, how do I add 2 and 2? So of course that's a math question, so it should route to our math tutor agent. Let's try it out. Adding numbers is a basic arithmetic operation. To add 2 and 2, it tells you very detailed how to do it because that's what we told it to do in the math tutor agent description here, or the instructions. If I add another example, how did World War II start? It'll hand off to the history agent. Now, something that would help a lot is actually tracking when a agent is handed off to, because we don't actually know explicitly which agent it did hand off to. We can learn about something called traces in a little bit, which will allow you to trace exactly what's happening, but it would be nice in our code to log somehow what handoff is happening, right? Now, one way you could do this is whenever you're providing the handoff, you can provide just the agent like this, that's fine, or you can wrap it in the handoff function here. So handoff, import handoff from agents. And to this, you can provide more detail. So the agent that you're trying to hand off to, there's a bunch of other settings that you can specify, but another really important one is on handoff. So you can basically provide a function that is called automatically when the handoff occurs so that you can do logging or run some piece of code as a side effect or whatever you want to do, right? So we're going to make a function on math handoff. It needs to have a context as the parameter. So context, run context wrapper, none. It's a little cumbersome to write, and then you can have whatever code you want. So I'm just going to print out handing off to the math tutor agent so that we know that. Here's another one for the history one. So now I'll put here on math handoff. All right, cool. So now this is a little more detailed. We can move that down if we want to. So now when it hands off, it should also call these functions here. Let's try it out. So we know which one it's routing to. Handing off to the math tutor agent. Nice. And then handing off to the history tutor agent. Cool. All right, I'm going to give you guys one more example of how to do handoffs because this is such a pivotal feature of the library for agents and stuff like that, which is handing off. We're going to start with a customer service agent. You assist customers with general inquiries and basic troubleshooting. If the issue cannot be solved, escalate it to the manager along with the reason why you cannot fix the issue yourself. So the manager is going to have a handoff description of handles escalated issues that require managerial attention. So you handle escalated customer issues that the initial customer service agent could not resolve. You will receive the issue and the reason for escalation. If the issue cannot be immediately resolved for the customer, create a ticket in the system and inform the customer. So we're going to give it the capability of creating a ticket by adding a tool. So it creates a ticket in the system for an issue to be resolved. So for example, if the website's down, for example, the manager can create a support ticket so the technical team can go fix that. And there's also an ID so we can like keep track of it, right? Pretty standard, I think. So we're giving them the capability of creating a ticket. And so now we need to configure it so that the customer service agent can hand off to the manager agent, right? Here we go, handoffs. We have a handoff. We're specifying the manager agent as the thing that we're handing off to. Now, one thing that we can do, and this is also implied in the prompt here, escalate it to the manager along with the reason why you cannot fix the issue yourself. Something that we can do, which is really cool, is in the handoff specify a input type so that when you hand off to the manager agent, it has to be in a specific type, just like our output type, structured output that we learned about. So, as an example, we can create this manager escalation type that has a field for issue as a string and then also why. So this is the issue that needs to be fixed that the manager should address, and then the why is why can you not handle it, used for training in the future. So if the customer service gets an issue and it can't handle it itself, the whole point is that it's going to escalate, right? But we should also say why we're escalating, because in the future, maybe it's something that we can train the customer agent to fix. That's just an example, like a real world scenario. Like if you're asking your boss for help, maybe in the future your boss can help you, like train you so that you don't have to ask for help every time. That's what I mean by this, okay? So we have this type here. We can then go to our handoff thing and do input type. So input type manager escalation. So now, again, whenever it's handing off to the manager, it has to be in this type. So it has to provide an issue and why. One final thing I'll add is a handoff callback just so that we know what's happening. So this time, since we're providing an input type, we also need to provide the input with the type in the actual handoff function as well, just besides the context. So we can just print out escalating to manager agents, the issue, and then also why, just so we know what's happening. So now down here, we can do on handoff, on manager handoff. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now we can finally invoke it. So we're going to invoke it using the customer service agent. And we'll say, I want a refund, but your system won't let me process it. The website's just blank for me. So ideally, it's just a customer on your website. The website's blank for some reason. And so they call this customer service agent. They try and fix it, but they can't really fix something if it's just blank. That's beyond their control. So they hand off to the manager. And then the manager's like, okay, I'll create a ticket to address the issue so we can get it fixed for any future customers. And then this one will have the responsibility, since it was handed off to respond to the original customer. So we'll get that final output and print it out. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's run it and see what we get. There we go. So we get escalating to manager agent, customer unable to process a refund due to a blank web page on the website. Reason for escalation: the customer is experiencing a technical issue with the website that cannot be resolved through basic troubleshooting. Creating the ticket for issue. So the manager, so it's passed off to the manager, right? But then the manager decided, okay, I'll create a ticket because, of course, they need to actually fix the issue. So customer unable to process a refund due to a blank web page on the website. The issue needs technical troubleshooting, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then finally, we're having the final response from the manager back to the customer. So I've created a ticket to address the issue with the website displaying a blank page when trying to process refunds. Our technical team will look into this promptly. Your ticket ID is 12345, which was passed back by the ticket tool function. Thank you for your patience. So there, it worked perfectly. Great. So let's just see an example of it deciding not to pass it up to the manager because not every situation needs that. So we'll say something like, hello, how much are tickets? You shouldn't need a manager to answer that question. So let's see what we get. There we go. Could you please specify which event or destination you are inquiring about for ticket prices? So of course it doesn't really know what I'm talking about. So it's just going to give us a basic response, but there's no reason to escalate to the manager for that situation. So everything is working perfectly. And that's it. That's pretty much all I'm going to show you in terms of handing off. I really hope this concept makes sense. You're basically enabling an agent to decide for itself whether to hand off to another agent to complete some task, right? There's more ways we can make this even more advanced that we'll see in the future, but this is a great start.